Welcome. Awesome. Welcome to our secular speaker series today. Be sure to put your name in the chat and be sure to switch the audience from hosts and panelists to everyone so that we can all see you. And if you're so moved, let us know what you are watching or reading that gives you some inspiration or just relief from like all of this. I will be up in Payson, Arizona with the Brim Country Democrats tomorrow. So if you're in the neighborhood, feel free to stop on by. But for today, we are speaking with the founders of the Secular Education Association, formerly Parents Against Lifewise. It is a focused movement of concerned parents, families, community members, and taxpayers who respect the separation of church and state. This organization's mission includes respecting each other's different religions, family values, and parental rights with a goal of allowing students to learn unhindered by religious pressure or coercion. And one of our board members actually sent me one of your shirts. I just got it yesterday. So I am proudly sporting my new Secular Education Association. It's going to take a minute for me to not call you all Parents Against Lifewise, but yeah. I love the new name. So I don't know, are you going to be sharing anything today?
Yeah, we've got a presentation that we can do.
Okay. So I'm going to do my best here to get logged in on my computer. But first, I'm sure it's probably part of your presentation, but I'd love to know how this all started. So I'm sure that you're going to tell everybody, but I'm really interested to hear like the two of you and how you got activated on this kind of movement.
Sure, yeah, we can start there. It's no problem. I started dealing with Lifewise Academy in 2021 when my daughter was in first grade or second grade. I went into the school for open house and they had this Lifewise class listed on her class schedule. And it's a Bible class that they pull kids out of school for. And I said, well, my daughter's not going to be going to that. Why is it on her schedule, right? And they told me that since she wasn't going, she would be going to an uninstructed study hall. So they sent my second grader to the gym class to play on the iPad and to read by herself. And it really got me fired up because now your religious program is affecting my child and her education, you know. So that's how I got started back then. And it's just been a roller coaster ever since. So.
Did you want to add anything?
Just that when Zach was experiencing this and he went online to sort of see if there was any opposition or anyone saying anything negative about the program, he could not find anything. There was no support. There was no opposition at all. And so that's sort of how I got involved. Was I had seen these red yard signs, and it originated in Ohio. That's where I'm from. And their motto is during school hours, which set off all kinds of alarm bells for me. And so when I went to look, I had found Zach, and he was the sole voice of opposition I found on the internet. And so we sort of teamed up and decided that this was not going to be a one-off issue. He was not the only parent that was going to experience this, and his daughter wasn't the only child that was going to suffer from it. So we needed to do something.
Right on. Well, if you want to go ahead then and share your screen, it looks like I have my download complete, so I'm going to mute myself.
All right, so we're going to start with RTRI, the specifics of it, release time for religious instruction. That's what this is all based on there, so it's a good starting point. A few main cases of the federal courts that you need to be aware of are Everson, back from 1947. It's the case that pretty much put the Establishment Clause applied to states and public schools, not just to the federal government. That's roundabout, you know, the main topic of that case. And then the two cases related specifically to release time religious instruction were McCollum in 1948. There was a Bible program that came onto the school property, like on little trailers, and we're doing these Bible classes on school grounds. And the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional because it's taking place on school grounds. A couple years later, in 1952, there was another case in New York that went to the federal court, Zorak. That changed it a little bit, but it really didn't. Like, it didn't override McCollum or anything like that. They still said McCollum is good law, and they based their new ruling off of McCollum, but they just laid out more specifics that these RTRI programs would have to follow. They must be neutral. They must be voluntary with parental consent. And again, they upheld McCollum, saying you can't use school resources, it can't be on school property, and it can't use school funding. And dive a little deeper into that case, because case law is very specific. So when we're talking about, Lifewise likes to cite that Zorak case as being a blanket that just allows RTRI across the nation. Like, it's all cool. The Supreme Court said it was cool. That's not how case law works. Like, case law is based on specifics. Like, the direct things, the details of each individual case matter when you're talking about laws and court cases. So some of the specifics in Zorak were that pupils were not solicited. Or this one was probably out of McCollum, where he was saying pupils were solicited in the buildings and the registration cards were distributed by the schools, and in one case printed by the school. This is something they said you cannot do. In Zorak, they said one of the reasons it was allowed is because the school authorities do no more than release students whose parents so request. There was no announcement of any kind regarding these programs in Zorak, no comments by the principals or teachers on attendance or non-attendance, and that all the school does besides excusing the pupil is to keep a record. So that was the specific details of Zorak of why they said it was constitutional. So some of the current understandings of it are, they're all based on these last two cases. And it's pretty much everything I just read off there. No direct coercion, it can't be on school grounds, voluntary. They're trying to push equal access a lot further than I think they should, but that's something that, you know, the lawyers are going to have to hammer out in court, because it hasn't really been established in this scenario yet. It's really important to know that, like, state laws differ. Every state has different regulations and rules to these type of programs. And their constitution may have different regulations in it as well that put up separate walls and guidelines. So when you're looking at these laws, you have to look specifically at your state laws, your state constitutions, as well as what's at the federal level. So what's Lifewise Academy? They're abusing this RTRI system. It was started by a man named Joel Penton, who used to play for Ohio State. Any college football fans, Ohio State, you know, they're national champions. He was on a national champion team. He sat on the bench that year, but it's neither here nor there. His mentor was Jim Tressel. This is really important because he modeled his entire career after Jim Tressel's career. Like, aside from being a football coach, Jim also set up these huge events and brought, like, celebrities and athletes to come, like, evangelicalize other people and these young players, right? He would brag about how his church attendance for the weekly players chapel skyrocketed from 15 to 20% up to 75 to 90% while he was coaching. Because what's the implication there? If you don't go to church, you don't play that week, right? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't stated, but I'm sure that implication was there. But that was what Jim did on his side. He was very heavily involved in FCA. And Joel, the guy who founded Lifewise, he followed this to a T. He started his own business. He started two of them. One was called Stand for Truth, and the other one was called Relevant Speakers Network, where he would have these assemblies and bring in different celebrities and use his celebrity and the fact that he was a national championship player, right? That he has this ring, to come into these schools with a mandatory assembly that all these kids would have to go to, and then talk about motivational speaking and character development and keeping your word, that type of thing. And then he would also say, after school, we're having a concert. And this is where the real heavy evangelicalism came in usually. Not always. Sometimes they did it during the program itself, during the assembly. They got in trouble more than one time because the religious overtones were so blatant. So while he was doing all that, his sister was running an RTRI program in Van Wert, Ohio, out of this little garage here. He saw that and he got an idea. Molly?
Sure. So the idea that Joel came up with is, as you can see, here's their book that he wrote. This was published in 2023 during school hours. And you see where it says before and after that are crossed out. So they really are truly saying the quiet part out loud. He has a history of publishing books. So these are the other two. This one is for his Stand Your Ground, that last one that Zach just spoke about. He's really trying to make a career out of this whole speaker thing. And this idea, he thought, let's go ahead and McDonald's this. And to the point where this is a quote from that book, We have to McDonald's this thing. That's how we would spread release time. So what they're doing here is they've given it a brand, right? They've given it some recognition. This is originally intended to be something that's very community driven, something that like you, your temple, and your child would go to the school and discuss, and that would be the end of it. What they're doing is they've made it a corporate entity. It's very much an en masse versus an individual, which is what it was originally intended for. So they've really bastardized this RTRI law. And as you can see, their intentions, they lay out perfectly clear, and they continue to do so. Their vision statement, again, this is all published, things that you can find, is to reach unchurched students in public schools. And there's several instances where, you know, in their propaganda and their media, where they say, you know, that is our goal, is to reach every unchurched public school student. Well, the issue with that is that not all of our families or children, we want to be exposed to the gospel or to any religion, right? And so you do also see where they say Lifewise Academy's mission field. They truly are saying the quiet parts out loud. They're using our school system, which is a tax-funded, I'm sorry, excuse my voice, a tax-funded captive audience as a mission field. This is to bolster their church numbers. And this goes all the way back to around like the 90s or so. There was a big research study done where they basically, you know, all the evangelical denominations got together and they're like, okay, so when can we reach people the best? When are they most able to absorb and to like carry this on throughout their life? And what they ended up was the 4 to 14 window. Between the ages of 4 to 14, you are statistically more likely, if you become a Christian before the age of 14, to stay that way the rest of your life and not question it, you know, and to you know, want to spread that is also that time frame, that 4 to 14. That is when children are the most successful at evangelizing to their peers. So that's two-pronged, right? That is when they're most impressionable themselves, and when they themselves are able to impression their peers the most. And if you really think about this and you want to not sleep tonight, you know, Lifewise is targeting our elementary schools. What are the ages of our elementary school children? They're about 4 to 14, right? So this is a plan. This has been a long-term plan that's been going on for a long time. Do you remember the What Would Jesus Do bracelets in the 90s that they pushed? A lot of us here might be millennials or elder millennials, and you'll remember sort of there was this big youth group movement thing, and that's because these people had started to realize that that's what they needed to focus on. And it sort of coincides with the 10 to 40 window, which is a whole nother thing. That has to do with the equator, and where poverty and lack of education means that the gospel will reach people better. So this is very much an overarching evil 7 mountain mandate sort of thing.
That's the other thing. We want to start talking about what Lifewise actually teaches. This is a very specific interpretation. It's a very specific doctrine. Even though their Q&A here, their FAQ, I'm sorry, their FAQ, they've got a question. What does Lifewise teach? Is it associated with a specific denomination? They claim that they are not. They claim that this material is non-denominational. But then they go on to say in their FAQ that they get their curriculum from the Gospel Project and that it doesn't differ whatsoever from the Gospel Project. The Gospel Project is a curriculum that is published by Lifeway. Lifeway is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. The Southern Baptist Convention is who wrote the Gospel Project. So when you're saying that your curriculum is exactly for that, and the word they used in the lawsuit against me, because I published their curriculum, because they refused to share it, so they filed a copyright lawsuit against me. And what was the word that they used, Molly? It was a derivative of the Southern Gospel Convention, I believe.
Yeah.
The Gospel Project, but that was written by the SBC. So I'm sure we're all familiar enough with them that we don't have to go into the details of the kind of hateful rhetoric that they have, kind of misogyny that they believe. That's a rabbit hole you can go down if you want to. So what does that teaching actually look like? They have this document here that we uncovered. It was one of the first things that we uncovered, called Difficult Questions from Students. This is a teacher's guidelines to answer some of these harder questions from students. Molly, you want to go into the details of them?
Sure. A lot of them deal with sex, gender, identity. A lot of them also deal with sort of things like about your family makeup. And like, there's a couple that my parents, are they divorced? Or my parents are divorced. I'm sorry. Did they break God's rules? My mom's boyfriend lives with us. Is that a sin? What if I told my parents I wanted to be gay is another one? Or, they're basically what they're saying is all of these things are a sin. The answers might differ. They may differ on like which passages that they are referencing, but what it comes down to is every single thing of this is a sin. So does God hate people in the LGBT community? All sin angers him and makes him sad. So when if you're reading between the lines, what you're seeing is that these things are unacceptable. It is very much Southern Baptist. It is very much a narrow view of Christianity. Again, same-sex relationships, female pronouns. So there's a lot of transphobia, there's a lot of homophobia, there's a lot of purity culture, there's a lot of misogyny, there's a lot of gender gender roles, right? There's a lot of this sort of thing going on. So like there's just so many things that they touch on and they put it all in one document for us. That's how smart they are. But when you have to give out a one pager or like a quick fact sheet to your teacher because these children are going to be having these questions, and then you're able to put all of your hate on one paper. To me, that's very concerning because that tells me that they're planning on addressing these things, right? This is not, they always say it's not part of the curriculum. It's not part of the curriculum. Are you serious right now? Because every single one of your lessons can be tied back to some sort of hateful thing and hateful rhetoric that are in this one document. So it is very shocking and useful to see.
So we can look at it from a more theological perspective too. They have this document here. I believe it's out of their statement of faith. I don't know where my citation went. I believe it's out of their statement of faith though. Some of the key notes here, the scripture is God's infallible written word. This is biblical literalism. If it's written in the Bible, it is word for word reality, right? This is part of their core beliefs. I was raised Mormon. We were taught that a lot of the biblical passages were like proverbs. They were, stories. They weren't necessarily literally what happened, right? That's not what they believe here. One of the other things sticks out. Man sinned by disobeying God. All mankind is under divine condemnation. Man's nature is corrupt. He is totally unable to please God. This part really sticks out to me here. The salvation of man is wholly a work of God's free grace and not the work in whole or part of human works, goodness, or religious ceremony. Now remember, they're teaching this class under the guise of character development. They have a document called social emotional learning that they hand out to schools, even though this crowd is very much against social emotional learning in every other aspect of the term, right? They scream and shout against it. They use a document to say, look, this is also what we're teaching. We're just doing it with the Bible. How can you say that you are developing character when you're telling these kids that like it doesn't matter what you do? The works that you do here on this planet don't matter. That's not character development in any case. Christ is the only thing that can save you. It goes on a little further. This is where some of the division comes in. Like Christians, the believers, they get everlasting glory and blessings, right? But the non-believers, they get everlasting judgment and condemnation. So this is really important when you're talking about elementary school kids who are going back saying, you don't believe? Well, you're going to hell. That's what this translates to on the elementary level, right? Like this is the theological wording here, but when you're teaching it to 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, what it translates is you don't believe, you're not going to come to heaven with me, you're going to burn in hell. And we see that time and time again. We have dozens and dozens of testimonies of kids coming home with reports of things like this.
Kids not being able to sleep at night, telling their parents that they don't want to be Jewish anymore. This is a brand new slide. Forgive me, I'm going to get emotional just talking about it. But we just had a member of our group. She had been attending Lifewise meetings sort of undercover, and she managed to get audio. And the audio we have available as a Word document. It is posted in our private group. It's brand new posted. But this is a picture that group member took. That woman is holding a leather whip, and she's talking about the Passion of Christ. And she's saying things like it had to be a blood sacrifice, and it had to be the being sacrificed had to know what they were doing and do it willingly and to be completely innocent. She also says things like, so after all of that, Pilate sent Jesus to be whipped. And I looked up online, what did a Roman whip 2,000 years ago look like? And I found this picture. My son made this for me. By the time they were finished, there would have been no skin left on Jesus's back. His ribs would have been exposed, because once it takes your skin off, when they keep going, it's digging now into your organs. And these are 7 to 9-year-olds that are being taught this kind of stuff, that are being shown these kind of things.
They're not being taught, they're being indoctrinated. Like the other side always accuses, us of indoctrination. This is truly shocking to me, and it's child abuse. It's
It
child
absolutely
abuse.
is. And it's funny that you bring that word up. You're correct. They're not teaching them, they're indoctrinating them. That is my mistake. But one of the things, and this is totally, this is just wild to me. At the end of this particular class, she says there's a child, and the child says, how come so much of the Bible, and then it's inaudible, and then I hear the word detail. And the teacher says, I don't know, because I guess well, don't let the men hear me say this, but men are not that great with details, and men wrote the Bible, so I think men tend to leave off a lot of details. So you want to talk about indoctrinating someone and telling them what to believe. This is also some good examples of that. These tickets over here on the left are invitations that are sent back with the children, and they're personalized. So for example, it would say, you're invited, Zach. Molly would like you to come with her to Lifewise class. And so it says your name, and then it says your friend's name on them. And children, what do they want? They want to be included. They want to say yes to their friends. They want that invitation. It's gold. Are we for real right now? And so they use this sort of thing as an incentive, and to use the children to proselytize to the other children. They also do things like promise them rewards, like letting the kids pie them in the face, or they will promise things like Chick-fil-A meals or pizza parties or ice cream socials. And in a lot of places, these are people and children that are food insecure. So for me, that's very predatory, because you're taking a group of children out to have pizza every week or ice cream every week, while the other children whose parents are not giving them permission do not get that. And what if that pizza is the only, or one of the only hot meals they have that week, right? So it just further goes to show you that the division runs deep. The bribery is part of it. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Right here, how is Lifewise different from other release programs? We talked about it earlier on that slide where you saw the McDonald's logo, and Joel actually said we have to McDonald's this thing. And that's what he did. So instead of it being a community-driven, small, little local program as it was meant, Lifewise offers a structured plug-and-play model. So it is literally a franchise, as you would a McDonald's. If you were going to own one, you would buy all of the things and the licensing and the building and all of this from McDonald's corporate. That's the same for Lifewise. They have a 10-step to implement a program into a community. We do know that step 1 is BS, excuse my French, but they just picked a number, collect 50 signatures. And all this is them showing, they can show, like your school board, or they can show whoever's asking, that your community has some interest. Well, the big thing with this is that we tested it, and they don't care where those signatures come from. They don't verify if they're from those communities. We could sign a list for you guys in Arizona. Like, I'm in Ohio. We could sign a list for you guys in Arizona, and your community interest list would keep going up. So there's no verification, there's no oversight. That's a small thing, but it does matter when they're trying to say, oh, these are all community members that want it there. Well, no, because we've actually tested it, and we've also run the records request and have compared, like, these people don't live in this town. We know this, and so 2 is to join a kickoff meeting. 3 is raise $500. That $500, if they're not successful, or if they can't continue running the program or get enough children to attend, they forfeit that money to corporate. So your community does not see any of this money come back. It is funneled up into corporate, and then it disappears. Form a steering committee, draft a plan. A lot of these are sort of the people who are interested in your community are recruiting other people in the community and, like, getting them in on the grift. But in a lot of instances, they think that they're doing a good thing, right? Because they're partnered with their community church. 6 is a tricky one. That's one you want to keep an eye on. When they get to number 6, they're very much courting your school district. A lot of times you won't even know that this is going on because they like to do all of this behind closed doors. And in some states, they don't need school approval. So there are some states now, and we'll get into this a little later, and the legislation is what matters on whether or not they even need the school to sign off on them coming in. 7, recruit your team, train your team. This is them getting their training from corporate and getting all of their templates and all of their schemes and all of their grift materials. And then 10 is launch. That's an active program that's enrolling students. And that number 10 is when most people will find out it's happening at their school, is when they're already enrolling children. And that's by design. You'll see here, what are some of your goals? And this is a direct quote from the CEO. We don't want to stop until every one of the 50 million public school students in this nation has the opportunity to learn the Bible during school hours. Again, we know that not all of those 50 million public school families want that for their children. Secular public school is the only option for a free secular education, and we would like to keep it that way.
That's kind of their franchise model. Obviously, it takes a bit of money to do this. This is an example budget that we've got here. This is the low end of an example budget. This is for a smaller school. Just staff, they have no problem cutting staff costs and asking as many people to volunteer as they can. So that's one way they can cut some money there. Transportation as well. They often buy a big bus or a big red minivan. It's always big and red. It always has their branding on it, right? But they would prefer to just walk kids across the street. If they can cut out transportation costs and just walk kids, that's what they prefer to do. All of the money it takes to run this program at the local level comes from the local community. Lifewise itself had a revenue of like over $35 million last year, but they don't give
39 million.
They don't give any of that money back down to the community, though. If you're running this program in your town, you have to do all the fundraising and pay for all of these expenses. Some of the fees that they have, Molly mentioned the $500 at step 3. That's only the beginning of it. There's also another $1,000 that you have to have at step 7 and another $1,500 before you can go live. So all in all, you're looking at $2,000 there. And like she mentioned, if your program doesn't get off the ground, they will absolutely just keep that money. There's also annual student fees. This number has went up. I pulled this from a document that's a couple years old. I believe it's up to $35 per student now. If a student participates even once, if your kid goes and you decide it's not for them and pull them out, they're still paying that $35 for the child, even though they only went one time. There's also a 50 student minimum. So if you've only got 25 kids going, you're still paying as if you have 50 kids going to Lifewise Corporate. This is just an MLM. It is just a grift. They are siphoning money from the local community under the guise of helping them increase their numbers. All donations have a 4% processing fee. That's not just donations. There's a bunch of transaction fees because Lifewise keeps the money. They manage the money. They give your local program a spending card, right? So there's transaction fees, donation fees, fees on fees on fees. They have a red zone policy in case your program is not financially performing to where they want it to be. Again, if you don't have 50 kids, you're paying out of the pocket. That's not a profitable margin, right? You can't keep running something like that. You can't run a nonprofit in the red any more than you can run a business in the red, right? So they will close programs down. They have a red zone policy before that, though, and one of the things, like I've said, they will absolutely reduce the pay of their directors to minimum wage until they get their program up and running. We saw this play out in real life through some internal emails that we got here. This is from a lady who worked with Lifewise and had a real bad experience with it. She sent this to Lifewise Corporate like as an exit interview. She said Lifewise pushed Tricia out of her role as director because the community itself was lagging financially. It disgusts me that we want to bring Jesus into the public schools and we can't do that because of the price of materials and such that you are charging. She said when they were running it, of course, it was all volunteers. No one was worried about the funds coming and who was going to make money except Lifewise Corporate. They're very much worried about that. She's saying we can do it for free. You should be ashamed of the money. And then she resigned and said she wants nothing more to do with Lifewise. It's an internal perspective of what we're talking about here. We're not just, kind of blowing smoke here. You can see other people who have worked inside see this as well.
Yeah. They asked this woman to change her timesheets.
That was a different person. Yeah.
Yeah, there was another woman that was asked to just, go ahead and fudge her timesheets. So what's the problem? We also talk about like, who are these people? Who are these teachers? How much experience do they have, right? That's important. This is their qualifications and experience requirements. A minimum of 2 years of classroom teaching. The important part is the second part of that sentence. Teaching experience in either a school or church setting, right? They do not verify where you've taught or if you've taught. They do ask at one point for like a pastor or like a clergy member recommendation letter, but we have several emails where they outright say like, oh yeah, we don't even get those most of the time and we don't care. And of course, a mature personal Christian faith that's consistent with their statement of faith. That is all of the qualifications. That's it. That's it. So when we're talking about what they're able to handle or how they're able to teach these children, you start to run into some issues because these are people that have no idea what it's like to really teach, right? Even if they had been doing it in Sunday school, they have no idea. That extends not just to their teachers and their volunteers, it also extends to their bus drivers. My mother she's a retired public school bus driver. And let me tell you something, she had to be able to do her own inspections. She had to know the parts of her bus. They had to do so often inspections with the garage, and then the garage itself would have to do so often with the state. Lifewise Academy is not beholden to any of these. This is a public school that's held to these standards. They have a ministerial exception, or they don't count as a school bus because they are a parachurch organization, right? So they don't have to abide by these laws. This gentleman right here, we get it. He's just working on a seat. But does he also work in like on the brakes of that bus in his garage, like with no oversight and no one to check? You'll see over here, there's an accident that we actually had someone send us the proof of. And the scary thing about this is that whenever a public school bus driver, and this is pretty much the country over, whenever a public school bus driver gets into an accident, doesn't matter the details, they are immediately sent for a drug and alcohol test. Lifewise bus drivers are not required to do that. This accident you're seeing right here was so bad that children had to be taken by ambulance to the hospital. And then of course, as long as you've got the oversight lacking in the mechanic department and with the bus drivers themselves, we might as well talk about the background checks of everyone altogether. And this is one of the worst scandals we had, or at least one of the ones where we were the most involved in. Lifeway's had hired a director for Firelands, Ohio. Her name was Renee Beck, and she was their director, and they had pat her all over social media and everything was great and fine and wonderful. And someone sent me a tip, and I did a simple Google search and found out that Renee Beck had been fired from Loudonville schools in Ohio for sexting a student.
Oh.
Now,
right.
she was not prosecuted, so she doesn't have a criminal record per se, but the reason that is because she agreed to give up her teaching license permanently. So she can never teach in the state of Ohio ever again. But that does not matter one iota to Lifewise Academy because they hired her knowing full well exactly what she had done. And they can't say they didn't, because after I broke the story, as just an amateur sleuth myself, they put her on administrative leave for 12 hours. And then after the public lost their minds about it, they fired her, and they blamed it on her not telling them about this situation, not on their background checks that are merely consumer reports, not on themselves at all as being the ones that are responsible for keeping these children safe from people who are looking to get around children because they can't in other areas of their life. That's what we're looking at. That is a huge concern, and we see it over and over and over again. This just happens to be a really egregious one, but we see like people convicted of child negligence. We see people that have been involved in other sex scandals in their church. We see people, they wanted to have Lifewise at a factory where they were allowing violent child sex offenders to work at said factory. So yeah, there's a big disconnect in the background checks, and Zach will probably talk a little bit more about that as well.
Are the ones who are responsible for these background checks. It's just another way that Lifewise corporate can kind of wash their hands of any accountability, right? They put it on the local director instead of on the, well, excuse me, instead of on themselves.
And they're using a company. Tell them about the company they would be using.
Yeah, when we first started looking into them, they were using a company called Protect My Ministries. So the name of the company alone kind of shows you, where their priorities are. I ran a background check on myself just to compare it because I've got a bit of a criminal record. I know you might not believe that. But I've got a bit of a record myself. So I ran the background check and it brought back less hits than Lowe's did when I applied for a job there. So that's just kind of a comparison that Lowe's is catching more of my record than these guys did.
They've since changed their company they use 2 or 3 times.
Well, that's the thing. They said that they've changed their company, but again, it's up to your local program directors. So if your local program director is looking at old guidance or just picking whoever they want, there's no oversight like there is with anything.
Right. Correct.
So how does this affect the schools? Like we've kind of talked about how it affects kids, kind of the overall picture. How does this actually affect the schools though? One of the biggest issues comes down to scheduling because usually the federal guidelines and usually state law says that you can't be missing any core curriculum for these classes. That means you're pulling kids out of things like art, things like music, things like PE. They're missing library, they're missing STEM. Like I said, my daughter, they're also sending aids. That's another thing. There are so many. We'll try to buzz through this. I know we're getting short on time. We want to have questions at the end. They're sending aids though. That's another way that they're using resources.
Federally funded aids, taxpayer funded aids for special needs kids. They're sending them to Lifewise with them.
Yeah, this is Elmwood local schools. This is one of the most egregious ones that we've documented. They're renting the building on the school grounds. Like it is a school building that they are renting to Lifewise to let them use. They're also giving their volunteers security badges. So these people are literally just swiping themselves in and out, walking classroom to classroom to pick these kids up. They've given them Wi-Fi access, tech support. They gave them their own school phone number and school extension. They're soliciting participation. Like this is the kind of stuff that you see where it's so ingrained with administration. They actually sent out a note to parents saying, listen, if your kid's going to Lifewise, you're probably not going to meet your IEP minutes. Anybody who's worked with an IEP knows that's not how it works. An IEP is a contract between a parent and the school. You can't just send out an email that says, sorry, we're not going to abide our contract.
And if you're participating, you've made it known as such, which is really what they've said. Like your child's missing IEP minutes if you're letting them participate in this, and you should be fine with that, right? No, not how it works. These photos are taken, I took them, they're at my daughter's school. I was there to meet with the principal for a totally unrelated thing. And the principal was 10 minutes late because this woman is standing in his doorway trying to coordinate Lifewise and the pickup. My daughter goes to a very small school. We're talking about 4 kids, 5 kids, maybe tops that are leaving, but we have schools where 20, 30 kids are going at a time. You see where they're standing around taking up space, causing confusion. There's other parents in the background trying to figure out what they're doing. They're standing in front of our administration desk. Those are our taxpayer funded employees there that are helping them instead of me trying to get into a meeting with my daughter's principal. So everyone you see here is like involved in Lifewise, except for maybe the woman in the stripes, but they're so disruptive to the day just by being there, right? And they use so many, they say we're not taxpayer funded, but the thing is that everything they touch, they are affecting, and everything is taxpayer funded in a public school, right? You'll see here, Zach, do you want to talk about this more? This is when we actually have proof in emails where they're missing core classes.
Right, like we said earlier, state law is usually pretty clear. They're not supposed to miss these core classes, but we see they are. They're pushing every boundary, every chance they get. They don't care. Even Title I time that they're missing there. And then again, this is a principal saying, listen, if parents are okay with their students attending Lifewise and they have agreed upon their students missing some instructional content. Well, no, not if the parents are under the impression that you're going to follow the regulations and the guidelines. Maybe they're okay with them missing gym class. Maybe they're okay with them missing lunch and recess. But that doesn't mean they're okay with them missing science and social studies and their reading time. And they want to take them out of class because, like I mentioned, lunch and recess there, this is something we fought for in Ohio. We tried to limit it so they could only take them out during lunch and recess. So these kids aren't missing their instructional time because we value art. We value music. I love music. It is my favorite thing in the whole universe. So to be missing music class, taking this opportunity away from kids, it's a terrible thing from our perspective. Like, art helps people in so many ways. You can't just have that not be a part of their curriculum. There's a reason we're teaching these things at school, right? But there's a reason they want them to miss that too, because they double their enrollment when kids are missing class. A kid would much rather skip PE than skip recess, right? So of course they are. I mentioned study halls. My daughter was getting put into a study hall and they were listing Lifewise, on the schedule. This is from my daughter's school. They did it in 2nd and 3rd grade. The really messed up part, this is from 3rd grade. When it happened in 2nd grade, I got a hold of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I got a hold of the ACLU. I had all these organizations on the school saying, listen, you guys can't do this, right? You guys cannot list this as a class. You guys cannot be shoving his daughter in a study hall. That seems like punishment, right? And the school's response was, he's lying. That's not happening. And they did it again the next year in 3rd grade. We got some internal emails, the ACLU saying records request on my behalf. This is the gym teacher that was watching over her in study hall, referring to her as a Lifewise leftover. This is the principal of the school talking about another student, saying that he definitely needs some Jesus in his life. This is after a real long interaction between the principal and the Lifewise staff about how Lifewise couldn't handle this kid's behavior. He was having behavioral problems and they didn't know what to do about it. And they needed some advice from the school. And then it escalates to they need the school to handle it. Just from this one school, my daughter's school in Defiance, there are accounts of kids punching each other on the Lifewise bus, kids being left alone on the Lifewise bus, kids being held down by the Lifewise teacher. I promise you, these people do not have the qualifications and the certifications to be restraining children, right?
Oof.
That takes a special certification. That takes a special licensure. Takes special training, right? These people do not have that, but yet they are restraining kids. This is a testimony from a teacher saying they're not permitted to teach anything new during the time Lifewise kids are gone, because how could they? They've got 80% of their class missing. They can't teach anything new. She gives an account of a student who came back to tell Lifewise, he came back from Lifewise and told another student that identified as gay they were going to hell and they couldn't be friends, asking what a prostitute was and getting their feet washed. This is something we see happen a lot. We see them washing the feet of these children pretty frequently.
What?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. This is insane.
It's a lot. I know it is so overwhelming. It's a lot.
This is,
Go ahead, Molly.
I was going to say, this is the same thing that we talked about earlier when I was speaking about children coming home and crying and being worried about hell and asking, why don't we believe in this? Or I don't want to be Jewish anymore, or whatever it is. And this is basically that exact thing. Next thing I knew, my 9-year-old son had told me about one of his friends who was in the Life program who told him he was going to hell because he didn't believe in Jesus. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, right? And it's all sorts of things. It's, the difficult questions paper that we talked about. We have, I would say, have a complaint from almost every single one of those areas. Like, you can't tell me they're not teaching that when these children are coming back and they're using that language as weapon against their peers. It's just, it's wrong.
We have spoken with a lot of like ex-evangelicals, that's part of our, authors, journalists, and then inevitably we, come across somebody who's been completely traumatized. And they always talk about, they frequently talk about how like they learned about pornography in church. Like they learned, like, prostitute, they didn't, a child shouldn't even know what that word means, right? Like this is wild.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a very, very narrow doctrine. The things that they are teaching is not everybody's interpretation. We always try to make the point that we are not anti-religion by any means. We're not anti-Christian. This is evangelicalism. This is Calvinism. This is a very, very narrow viewpoint and interpretation of the Bible. And it's not just us saying that. It's not just our beliefs. There have been many, many churches, many different faiths that have spoken out against what's being taught in these programs. We've got links to all these at the end if you want to read more in depth. They like to brag that they're privately funded, right? Because again, that's kind of what the Supreme Court precedent set. Like they're not supposed to be using any public funds. Of course, they got PPP funds during COVID, 2 of them, in fact, right? And they didn't have to pay those back. Over here in Ashland, you can see Ashland got ARPA money, and they gave an unknown chunk of that to Lifewise as social services. That's on the macro scale of how they're actually getting government money, right? Aside from all the resources that we've been using and the time being wasted at school, they are actually getting federal money, right?
Not only are they getting federal money, but they're getting federal endorsement, and that's by our politicians, so specifically from the state of Ohio. But you'll see it happen in your state too. Whoever is your most crazy right-wing evangelical politician is going to jump on the Lifewise boat, because this here is John Houston. He was our lieutenant governor, and he actually has an office of faith-based initiatives, and they went around and the whole state with Lifewise and had like a tour where he pushed it. He endorsed it and he pushed it, and he absolutely made it seem as though it was, state sponsored, or that it was a state approved, which is wrong on so many levels. And we see this a lot. Zach talked about Jim Tressel. He was a coach. Well, he is now our attorney general.
Nope, he's the lieutenant governor.
I'm sorry. Now he's our lieutenant governor.
But
yeah, they switched. So there's so much incestuousness in politics that it is undeniable. They can say, and they do say, that they're nonpartisan and they don't have anything to do with any of that, but it's written everywhere, and we have the proof. There's receipts. This is Joel Penton. This is his text messages where he's saying that Lieutenant Governor Houston called and spoke to a school board member to pressure her into voting for Lifewise.
this is in a chain with other school board members. This is a chain with the CEO, 2 school board members saying, yeah, I talked to the lieutenant governor, he called her, and then again, he pressured her again a second time, right? A month later.
Yeah.
That's insane. Imagine yourself being a school board member and just getting a call from a lieutenant governor telling you how to vote on a local issue. You were elected by the local people to make those decisions. You don't need your state governor calling and telling you what to do. And it's wildly ironic to me that the party of small government is the ones doing this, right? Our attorney general also got involved here in Ohio, sending letters out to the schools individually. He put out blanket statements and blanket letters, but then he also sent out these type of letters endorsing these programs and telling schools they should just go along with it directly to schools and their superintendents. Here you can see the CEO and the co-CEO of Lifewise celebrating some legislation change that they pushed in Ohio and Indiana and Oklahoma and other states. They have changed the law. It used to be that schools could choose to allow these programs. The language was schools may adopt a policy to allow RTRI programs. They changed it to schools shall adopt a policy, forcing and mandating every school district to adopt a policy to coordinate and work with their program. And they wrote this legislation themselves. So you can see the boom they've had since doing so.
Remember, we come on the scene in 2021.
Yeah.
And so we've been yelling. And this map, actually, you can get to it from our website. You can type your district in, you can see where you are. But every green dot on this map is a school that has one of those community lists started, the ones that need 50 signatures. So every green dot is that. They have a signature started. And then every red dot you see is a program that is enrolling children. And then you'll see, of course, all the colors in between. So this is April 2024. Ohio, you can't even see. This is July 2024. So that's what, 5 months? And then here's November 2024. And February 2025. And April. And so this is probably the last one that we have the most updated screenshot of it, but you can go and look at it and zoom out as much as you'd like. Again,
I also localized it a little bit for you here. So you can see just Arizona, how active they are here in your own state. We've got a few different schools here that are already on different steps of the plan. You got Sierra Vista there on step 5. They're drafting a plan, so they're going to be approaching the school board real soon. Deer Valley, execute the plan. They're ready to roll. They're going to be rolling out into the school any day now. Obtain school approval. They're in Peoria, it looks like. And then Casa Grande, they're training their team. So you can see this isn't just an Ohio issue. It started out as an Ohio issue, but once one of these programs gets a foothold, they spread from there. Well, all it takes is one in your community, and then the neighboring community hops on board because they are pushing it like an MLM. They are trying to get other people in, other churches in. This is their revenue just from 2020 to 2024. I'm not from the nonprofit world. I'm not a CFO. I'm not a business manager. I don't do hedge funds, but this kind of growth for a nonprofit seems insane to me. We're talking 250%, 315% year over year. That's nuts. But again, it's because they're sucking the money from the local towns.
And they're also getting money behind the scenes from these bad actors. So everyone in this picture, we have somehow tied to Lifewise Academy, whether they've been promoted, they've been featured on their podcast, they've been approved by,
sponsored their summits back and forth.
Summits. Exactly. We have found some sort of connection between Lifewise and everybody on here. So, pay close attention to that because they are absolutely involved in the spread of Christian nationalism along with everyone else on this board.
And that brings us to the NACL, which is a special one I want to mention and talk about here real quick. I know we're almost at our hour already. The National Association of Christian Lawmakers. They are a group of legislators from all across the country that gets together with the agenda of pushing these bills like the Chaplain Bill, the Ten Commandments Bill, and of course the RTRI bill. Lifewise gave them a whole sales pitch of legislation that they wrote. Lifewise wrote this legislation along with the help of the ADF and First Liberty. They admit to this because I found the sales pitch that they gave NACL and I published it. And it is about an hour of them talking about how great Lifewise is and how they wrote this legislation for these people to go back and push into their own states. This legislation, it takes the option away like we talked about earlier, but it goes so much further than that. And it's also saying that if you allow other programs into the school building, then we need to be allowed into the school building too. So they're trying to overturn the precedent with this new state law that they're writing. They want to overturn federal precedent. They want to get sued as much as we want to sue them. So now that we've freaked you out and depressed you, there are some things you can do, right? Mainly, our biggest thing is still raising awareness. We want to get people as engaged as much as we can. School policy is another really important thing. Like in Ohio, they have mandated that schools have this policy. We worked with a bunch of different, a couple different lawyers and a bunch of different administrators and people like that to kind of put together our own model policy. And we distributed it to different school districts and said, listen, these are talking points. These are things that you can put into policy to protect your educational time, to protect your students, to relieve some of this pressure, to make sure they're safe. One of the main things we got in Ohio because of our pushback, the legislator actually changed the law to say that schools were allowed to dictate the types of background checks. So instead of just allowing Lifewise to run these crappy third-party checks, the school can say, listen, you have to have an FBI check, you have to be fingerprinted, you have to have the same checks our teachers do, right? So that was a real big win for us. But schools have the authority to do that now, at least as it stands. As soon as some of this stuff started getting put into policy, just about a week or two ago, because the policy went into effect at the beginning of April. So schools had to have their policy at the beginning of April. About a week or two after that, First Liberty comes out on behalf of Lifewise and says, listen, we're going to sue you. We're going to start suing schools that do these types of restrictive things. Thankfully, there are a couple schools who are ready to stand up and be sued. So this is going to be fought out in the court, and I assure you, Ohio is going to be the battlegrounds where it is done at. But it's spreading. I mean, don't think this is just an Ohio problem. It's just going to set the precedent, right? As you saw, it's coming to your state too. So.
Right on. Well,
I know it's a lot. We hit our hour mark though.
man. Well, and there's some questions here. So let me see. Let me go back, see if I can find the questions.
The QR link has all our resources too. It's got our email. Our YouTube page has a lot more detailed videos, especially about the NACL stuff, about the background checks. So,
Yeah, basically anything that we rushed through on here, we have in detail and broken down further, either on our website, or you can always join us in our private group. It's a national group, and so we like everyone from every state to be involved.
Okay. There's a question here from Tori. How do you all find out about these programs and the stage they're at in local schools? Given what you mentioned, Ari, most people not finding out until stage 10.
yeah, that's why
Where we come
awareness
in.
is so important for us. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, you can also, like, to find out specifically about your school, you can go to that map on our website. It's linked there under map, and then you can search your own school district on the search bar and everything. But yeah, community engagement, just telling your friends, telling your family, posting on Facebook, as much noise as we can. We've been heavily engaged with the, you know, blessing. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
so if you're in a group that allows open posting in some way, or they allow you to show other groups or talk about things in that nature, we always ask that you do that, because of course everyone knows that sharing in groups is sort of hard sometimes to overlap and rules and things of that nature. So don't get yourself in trouble, but the more people we can find and the more people we can educate, the better off we all are. And it is coming from the East Coast to the West Coast. So you guys are the ones that we worry about, the ones that we can try to help the most, because they haven't already tied your hands in a lot of the ways as they have us. So tell your neighbors, tell your people in Seattle, tell your people in California, tell your people over there, because they, like Zach said, once they get their foothold, it is like wildfire, because it's almost like the whole permission thing, right? And so it gives permission, and it gives a false sense of security to the other people that are introducing it in their community. Like, well, they had it and they haven't had any problems. Well, you're not hearing about those problems because those parents don't know where to turn to. We are where they turn to.
Mhm. There's a question here from Jay. Is there any evidence of school boards or school districts shutting down Lifewise?
Where they can, absolutely. Before they were successful in changing that law from may to shall in Ohio, we had school boards that were like, absolutely not. We are rescinding our entire RTRI policy. No one's leaving school for RTRI. And so that was an available option to them at that time. So you're going to want to familiarize yourself with Arizona law, where you are now, where it's headed. Zach, do you have anything?
I just pulled up, I just went back to our map here just to see. It looks like Arizona was a May state last I knew. I would guess that there's probably legislation. If it's not been pushed this session, it'll probably be introduced next session to change you to a shall state. So it's definitely something you need to watch out for. But while you're a May state, yes, your school can choose not to adopt a policy allowing these programs.
Encourage your school district to protect your children, because that's what this is. It is them. They are predatory, and they are using the children to proselytize to the other children and bring them into the evangelicalism of Christian nationalism. So that is what we're looking at here. This is Hitler Youth, but of the religious right. And they are following a very specific playbook.
Right.
So the more we can get everyone to on board, to know and to be scared is better. And I know that we hate to do that, but this calls for drastic this is drastic times. I mean, we all know that, but this is one of those things where when we talk about the destruction of public education, they've already targeted before school, they've targeted after school. This is them going for the middle of the day to divide our communities and make our children question who they are.
Mm-hmm. Uh, um, I do want to point out Diane Post is our legal director. Some of you may have heard about our victory in Vale Unified School District, where we were able to, it was actually the community members. So again, if you see something, say something. And these community members, some of them, Mormons themselves, were pissed, So we got a flood of emails and correspondence from people. So, and we were victorious. It even made some of the national news. So Diane says, anyone having this happening in their school, please contact Secular AZ Legal Department so we can investigate and follow up. And that's info@secularaz.org. And there's,
Absolutely.
is it okay if we keep talking for just a little bit? Is that all right, since there's some more questions?
We're good with it. I'd like to add on to that. We encourage people to contact us as well. We don't have a legal department yet, but we do have an archive of documentation, and that's really important. If you are having these problems at your school, you need hard evidence. You need to be taking pictures. You need to be saving flyers. People don't think about it until it's too late. They'll see something at school, but it's really important. Snap a picture. Everybody's got a phone, right? You need to document these types of things. And yeah, report them to you guys. Like we said, we like it when people report them to us just so we can archive it. We're also in close connection with the American Atheists, Americans United, and the real egregious ones. We can pass up to them as well. You can report to them. Everybody will keep you anonymous too. That's another big concern. A lot of times you have teachers that want to say something and they are so scared to say anything as teachers because of their contracts, right? But most of these organizations, ourselves included, will keep you anonymous.
So, okay, there's a question here. If this is happening near us, and we know it is, Deer Valley's at stage 9, Peoria Unified, really problematic district is at stage 6. So
They
if this is,
target those first.
what's that?
They target those first. They will absolutely target your most red, rural, conservative, where they're going to get the most foothold and the most empathy and acceptance. They will target them first.
Yeah.
And then they will turn their attention to your metro areas that are struggling. And then the
Mhm.
last place they're going to go is the suburbs where there is the most money. And those people have a lot of time to research what's going on with their children. And so they get a lot of pushback when it comes to the suburbs. But that's the last place they're going to target.
Yeah. So now we know that this is happening near us. What can we do to stop them without inadvertently giving them free advertising or attention?
Yeah. That's a good one. Get people in your community involved, like on your local level. So if you have a local community group, rally your troops, let them know what's going on, have them join Secular AZ, have them join us at the Secular Education Association, share our posts. If you're not comfortable doing it, then go to people who may be more comfortable being out loud. And if you can start by having community awareness, a lot of times we see that pushback matters even more than on a national level, right? If you have parents that are using the parental choice, but of their own reason, like, hey, we want to see these people's curriculum. We want them to have as good of background checks as our public schools do. Well, we want this, we want that. Well, then they have to listen to the parents in their district as well. So get on your school board, get involved, go to the meetings and ask them, do your freedom of information requests, know your rights as parents and use them.
This
Yeah.
QR code breaks kind of some of the things you can do down into a little more details. But yeah, that question is kind of a double-edged sword, and honestly, there's not really a way around it, right? Like if you're going to talk about these issues, you are going to raise awareness to the people who are in support of it. So it's just kind of a know your audience thing as well. One of the big things I encourage is getting out in front of them in regards to your local churches, right? Because again, they're coming to your local churches saying, hey, this is just Bible education. This is just Jesus loves you during the school day. But if you can get some of the clergy to look a little deeper than that, and if their doctrine doesn't align, then they've lost an ally, right? Then they're not going to align with this program. But again, if you're talking about your evangelical megachurch in town, there's not going to be anything you can say to convince them, right? Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And I see in the chat, that's a really great point. Again, it's about knowing your audience, and you guys are going to know Arizona better than I ever will. And so if the wealthy suburbs are where they have their most empathetic ear or where they have their most conservative, religious extremists, then they will go there as well. It's really going to be where they're most accepted first and who's going to question them last. But they like to target schools that are struggling, and they tout a paid for study that says that they improve like disciplinary issues and attendance issues. It's a paid for study. None of it is real. We've debunked it with an expert. But they give a false sense of like, we're going to help you to these inner city schools or schools rurally that don't have the same kind of resources that the wealthy suburbs do. And they'll prey on them. We talk about food insecurity, that sort of thing. They'll prey on them in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stephanie, I agree. Tucson and Pima County, Arizona tends to be, I think, a little bit more progressive. And so the suburbs there are a bit more progressive, whereas the suburbs here tend to be very red. I think that I really do believe that there are a lot of people who are moving from California to escape like the liberalism. And so lucky us here in Arizona, we were so close, one seat in each chamber to flipping our state house and our state senate. And it just didn't go our way. This is a lot, and I have cruised around on your website before, and they have a ton of information on their website.
Too
So,
much. It's too
yeah,
much
like,
information. It's overwhelming and I apologize. I put the website together myself. You can tell it's very amateur. We are working on a new one though, so.
right on. Oh, okay. Yes, Pat, I will definitely bring this up at the Payson meeting tomorrow. This is really heavy. I am imagining grown adults washing children's feet that don't belong to them, and I'm super creeped out, and everything is terrible. But so, and you are like me, you both are focused on all things terrible. So I'd love to hear from you. This is how I end every one of our discussions. What gives you hope?
Zach?
I'll start. I would say the fact that I know we have made a difference and that we are just parents who got pissed off, right? Like I can show you tangible ways that we have made a difference. We stopped that class from taking place inside a factory with the predator, right? We got the sexter fired, right? We have helped these school boards put in smart policies that will ultimately protect these students and their education. And I'm not saying any of this to brag. I'm saying it to emphasize the point that I'm not a guy to be writing school policy, right? I'm just a parent. I work part-time as a cook at a comedy club, right? But this affected me and my daughter. And anybody can stand up for what they think is right and they can make a difference.
Right on. How about you, Molly?
You guys, having people that attend webinars, people that care, people that are scared. I know that sounds insane because it shouldn't give you hope when people are afraid, but I think that when something lands and you start to become afraid and it's starting to affect you personally is when action happens. And that is something that's giving me hope because I see that happening more now in the last maybe month than I have in years. And so I feel like people are waking up and they're afraid and they ought to be. And that is giving me hope in the weirdest way.
Yeah, I wish they had woken up a few years ago, but hey, at least they're waking up now, right? And we're all like, welcome. We've been waiting for you, right?
Exactly.
But at least
Exactly.
they're waking up now. Well, I'll tell you what, we've been going back and forth. We call this our secular speaker series, and then somebody else called it Rage Friday because we always get really angry about things. And then we were like, but wait, doesn't it also give us hope because we end on hope? So I'm gonna just hang on to that little bit of hope that you gave us as I cruise into my weekend. And I hope that everybody that attended today, that you are able to hope into your weekend rather than rage. And Zachary and Molly, thank you so much for joining us today. Nothing but kudos in the chat for you two. Thank you for all the hard work that you do. Appreciate
Yes.
it.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate the opportunity. So.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Thanks for spending your lunch with us. We really appreciate it. Sound the alarm.
Sound the alarm. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.